Kale stood inside the tribunal ring with her hands locked behind her back, so no one would see them shake, while the king of the seven clans removed the black iron torque that marked his active rule and set it on the stone table in front of 5 witnesses who did not meet his eyes. The chamber had no windows, only braziers and carved wolf standards, and the firelight pushed hard shadows across Dante Ashford's face until he looked like something cut from old winter rock. The clerk read the charge in a flat voice: 3 breaches of claiming law in year 623, censure, succession review, and a temporary abdication hearing lasting 9 days. When the clerk reached her name, accomplice in unlawful inducement, Kale felt the old public shame from year 619 rise in her throat so fast she tasted metal. She had survived one ceremony where a crowd watched her be judged unworthy. She had promised herself she would not survive another by going still and silent. Her hesitation had a name: fear of being disbelieved in front of everyone who mattered, and she resolved it by stepping forward before anyone invited her. She said, clear enough to carry, "I deny inducement. I demand seal review." Rurik Ashford, war regent and the king's uncle, did not look at her when he answered. Denied. The seals are clean. His voice made the chamber tighten. Kale nearly sat down because that was what low-rank women did when high-rank men told them no, and she knew it in her bones. Dante moved first. One word. No raised volume. Granted. Every head turned because he had accepted censure and was under review, and he still sounded like law walking on 2 feet. Rurik's jaw hardened. You have no standing to grant motions while under succession review. Dante looked at him, not angry, just final. I have standing until removed by vote. Read your own code. Kale had misread him for weeks. As control, as calculation, as someone using her to settle a legal war she did not understand. In that moment, she watched him choose procedure that could expose him further, just to give her one chance to defend herself. The room seemed to inhale and hold. The first seal broke under hot wax and silver dust. The second had been copied from an obsolete press. The third carried Maris Stoneheart's personal ridge where the tribunal crest should have sat. Kale could not feel her feet. Her cousin had forged the proof used to accuse her of trapping the throne, and the king had just wagered his remaining authority on Kale's right to challenge it. To understand how a girl reassigned to archive labor reached a tribunal floor where kings could fall beside her, the story had to go back to year 619, to the day her bloodline told her in public that she was not worth keeping. At the Stoneheart succession rite in year 619, Kale stood in white wool under a banner stitched by her dead mother, waiting for her name to be called as witness scribe for her own branch line. She had prepared the oath pages for weeks. She had copied each ancestor name twice, so no elder could claim smudging. When the High Elder opened the scroll, he read one added line: lineage impurity unresolved, and the hall shifted away from her in visible increments. Cousin stepping back, aunt looking at the floor, even the hearthguard closing rank as if she carried disease. Her specific wound was never simple rejection. The rite had been witnessed by everyone whose approval gave a woman status, work, and safety. The elders reassigned her that same hour to low-rank archive labor in the Crown City, stone basement, record copying, no speaking during tribunal proceedings. She had no PAC advocate, no marriage contract, no claim rights of her own. People described it as administrative necessity. Kale understood it as being filed away where no one had to look at her. She survived by becoming precise. She woke before first bell, copied land claims for petitioners who never noticed her face, and learned every clause in the claiming code because words were the only rank no one could strip once they lived in her memory. Alain Voss, the royal legal archivist, saw her speed and gave her harder work. Not kindness, just work that meant trust. Alain's mentorship was procedural, almost stern, and it saved Kale from dissolving into her own humiliation. Taryn Vale delivered court packets twice a day and refused to pretend she did not know Kale from before the rite. He brought contraband honey cakes and bad gossip and called her out when she tried to shrink herself. On nights when the basement lamps burned low and her hands cramped from copying, Taryn made her read aloud one statute she found unjust. It gave her anger somewhere useful to go. By year 623, Frost Court opening week flooded the city with clan delegations, oath renewals, and claim petitions. Kale was assigned to live transcription inside the lower hearing ring, invisible by design. She should have copied what was spoken and gone home. She heard Elder Stoneheart presiding for his delegation recite an oath register that did not match the sealed copy she had logged 2 nights earlier. 2 pages had been altered to transfer winter pasture rights from widowed bondholders to a regent-aligned marriage trust. She knew the signatures were fresh because she had dried the original ink herself. Her obstacle was clear. If she spoke, she risked insubordination charges and possible prison transfer. If she stayed silent, 3 widows lost their rights by spring thaw. She resolved the hesitation by standing in a chamber where copyists were not permitted to stand. Her voice cracked on the first word and steadied by the second. Presiding elder, transcript conflict. Request seal verification. Silence hit so hard she heard the brazier pop. Dante Ashford was present on the upper dais, listening to military levy petitions with the stillness people mistook for boredom. Kyle had seen him only at a distance before, always surrounded, always unreachable. She did not look at him when she spoke because direct eye contact with the throne could be read as provocation from someone of her rank. The elder dismissed her as confused. She repeated the request and placed both copies on the stone. That second act cost more than the first. It meant she was calling a senior clan witness a liar in full court. From Kale's vantage, Dante's response looked like cold efficiency. He asked for wax heat, compared seals himself, and voided the altered transfer in 6 short sentences. She noticed only what affected her directly, his order that the copyist remain available for follow-up. She heard detention in that phrasing. The audience in the chamber saw something else, his gaze lingering on her hands where the ink stains had not washed out, his jaw tightening when another elder called her archive girl like a slur. When the hearing adjourned, Kale took the servants' corridor to avoid delegation confrontations. Someone caught her wrist in the dark bend before the archive stair, not rough, just impossible to ignore. She spun, ready to bite if she had to, and found Dante in travel cloak without escort, scent of cold cedar and steel filling the narrow stone passage. He looked at her wrist once, as if confirming a fact, then pressed his thumb to her pulse and released a breath she felt against her skin. His scent settled there, unmistakable to any wolf kin within arm's length. He stepped back immediately, control snapping into place. Do not walk alone tonight. Kale stared at the mark, light, almost invisible, and felt anger outrun fear. Your Grace, formal claim declaration window is 30 days. You know that? His expression did not change. I know. He left before she could answer, leaving her with a marked wrist and no public declaration, which under code meant nothing official and everything dangerous. The first broken law had happened in private, a pre-claim scent mark outside the declaration window, and she read it as possession disguised as protection. She scrubbed the mark with lye soap until her skin reddened. Taryn noticed anyway when she reached for tea. Who touched you with crown scent? He asked softly, no teasing for once. Kale lied by omission, said only that a high-rank male had overstepped. Taryn wanted names. Kale gave him none because naming the king without proof of intent could be construed as sedition. Her old paralysis tried to return. Stay quiet. Survive. Disappear. She interrupted it with action and filed a transfer request out of Royal District Archives to border records where the throne's attention could not reach her. Week 3 delivered the hearing on her transfer request. Kale entered expecting denial by bureaucracy. Alawan had warned her that archive talent was rationed like grain in winter. The registrar opened the docket, then froze when a black sealed addendum arrived from the king's desk. Royal override invoked, transfer blocked on bonded mate protection grounds. The statute was explicit. That override existed for established bonded pairs only. Kale had no acknowledged bond. She had no declared claim. Dante had broken the code a second time, in writing, where every clerk could read it. The hallway outside exploded in whispers before she reached the stairwell. Someone laughed that she had climbed higher than her bloodline by lying on her back. Someone else said the king had finally picked a scribe who knew her place. Kale kept walking until she reached the old map room and shut the door behind her. The obstacle she had just resolved was physical distance from him. The new one was worse. Public suspicion that she was leveraging him, which stripped her credibility at exactly the moment she needed it intact. Dante summoned her that night to the council antechamber. She entered alone, spine rigid, refusing the tea offered by a steward because accepting comfort felt like consent. He stood at the window with hands behind his back, city torches reflecting in the glass. "Your transfer was unsafe," he said. "Unsafe from whom?" "From people reading your name on a departure roster." She laughed once, thin and unbelieving. "You made my name famous in the registry yourself." His jaw moved as if he bit down on words. "I chose the route that kept you alive." Kale heard arrogance, not fear. She left before he dismissed her, a technical breach she expected him to punish. He did not. Over the next 2 weeks, his mask cracked in deniable ways she refused to interpret. He reassigned 2 corridor guards after one made a joke about copyists being easy to buy. He asked Elowin for Kale's work schedule and pretended he needed archive throughput data. He stood in a doorway while she copied and said nothing for 5 full minutes, as if silence itself could keep harm away. Kyle read each action as surveillance. The audience watching her would have recognized pattern, attention that tracked her like a fixed star. Week 6 brought open council on winter levies and marriage alliances. Rurik introduced emotion-linking clan defense contracts to strategic pairings, which meant women with disputed lineage could be assigned to alliances without appeal. Kale was present as recording clerk. One delegate cited her file by number, evidence that unverified women destabilized treaty trust. She stood to object and was ordered down. The fear from year 619 squeezed her ribs so hard she nearly sat. She resolved it by speaking anyway. Record objection. Person referenced is present and not property. Rurik turned on her with contained contempt. "You forget where you stand." Dante did not raise his voice. He did not ask for debate. He stepped down from the dais to the floor beside her, placed his hand at the center of her back in clear public view, and said, "She stands under my protection rights." The chamber erupted because old code required 5 witness signatures for a protection claim tied to mate status, and he had none present in formal attestation. Public claim without quorum was voidable, not automatically void, which meant challenge, delay, weaponization. The third broken law had occurred in open council where no one could pretend it had not. Kale felt his hand and every eye in the room at once. Her body registered safety before her mind allowed it. The sensation terrified her more than hostility because it asked her to trust what she had trained herself never to trust, public attention attached to her name. She pulled away and requested reassignment to document storage. Dante let her go. He watched her leave with a face carved blank, and she mistook restraint for indifference because indifference hurt less than hope. Week 7 made the backlash concrete. Maris Stoneheart arrived at tribunal with sealed correspondence showing Kale had met privately with palace clerks before each legal breach. The letters implied she engineered the timeline to entrap Dante into invalid claims and force a marriage elevation. Kale recognized her cousin's script control immediately. the leftward tail on second-line Y characters that Maris never fully corrected. She demanded authentication. The tribunal stamps were perfect. Royal Ridge, archive lot numbers, everything. Maris did not need to prove motive beyond doubt. She needed enough plausibility to turn uncertainty into accusation. She looked almost gentle when she addressed Kale, which hurt more than open contempt. "You always wanted someone to see you," she said, voice pitched for the room. "You found a way." That sentence reopened year 619 with surgical precision. Kale's older cousin had stood beside her at that rite and looked away when impurity was declared. Betrayal had never come from strangers in Kale's life. It wore family colors. The forged packet triggered formal censure proceedings against Dante and accomplice review against Kyle. Rurik moved quickly, citing legitimacy risk across all 7 great clans if the throne ignored procedural breaches. Kale waited for Dante to deny her publicly and preserve himself. He did not. He accepted censure terms and entered succession review, which automatically opened the temporary abdication hearing set at 9 days. Before this choice, no one knew if he would pay real cost for her. After it, everyone knew he would risk the throne itself. The night before hearings began, Elowin called Kale to restricted stacks and unlocked a chest she had never shown anyone below senior rank. Inside lay personal records from year 612, sealed under death privacy until tribunal necessity. Elowin's hands shook once before she steadied them on the lid. "You need context," she said. "Not excuse. Context." Kale read the report of Dante's first mate, Selena Marrow, claimed through coerced political contract after border war, bond denied in private. Body found 3 months later after a failed escape from Alliance custody, followed by the palace order Dante signed that same winter, refusing all future mating petitions and restricting himself to formal claiming distance only. Dante's wound stopped being abstraction in that moment. Kale saw why he had built a life around control and distance, why the idea of a mating bond read to him as a corridor that ended in someone's grave, why touching her wrist in a corridor had cost him more than he could admit. His old assumption had been simple and brutal, that anyone near the throne eventually bargains truth for survival. Kale challenging falsified oaths without protection had cracked that assumption. She understood this and still could not forgive being handled without consent. Both truths sat in her chest together and neither moved. Week 8 shattered whatever procedural rhythm remained. Elowin left evening review with 2 junior clerks and reached the east stair when a support chain above the landing snapped clean at 3 links. No rust pattern, no stress warning. Stone blocks dropped where she had been standing a breath earlier because Tareen, carrying late packets, shouted and yanked her sideways by her sleeve. 1 clerk died. The other lost an arm. Kale arrived to blood on record pages and Elowin stunned against the wall, whispering chain was cut, not failed. The assassination attempt resolved a dangerous hesitation in the tribunal, whether the conflict was only romantic scandal or organized sabotage. Murder inside archive halls made motive unmistakable. Regent-aligned officers controlled stair access that night, and chain tools traced to military quarter inventory under Rurik's command authority, while seized correspondence tied those same aides to the Marriage Alliance block that needed Elowin dead before Seal Review could collapse their contract scheme. Rurik denied direct knowledge and condemned the attack, which may have been true. His faction had still leveraged old claiming code to preserve alliance marriages, and now that strategy sat attached to a proven murder plot in front of everyone. Kale spent that night in Elowin's infirmary room copying chain inventory logs, while healers stitched Taryn's shoulder where falling slate had cut him. Taryn joked through clenched teeth that he always wanted a scar people would ask about. Kale smiled for the first time in days and hated that it arrived next to a death shroud. She sorted names, times, tool signatures, and matched them to access petitions filed by Maris's legal aid 2 days earlier. The pattern became impossible to deny. Family betrayal and faction strategy had braided into one rope around her throat. At dawn, Dante requested private audience in the old observatory above the west wall, neutral ground not controlled by Regent Guard. Kale went because refusing would no longer keep her safe, and because she needed answers that could not wait for hearings. He stood near the cracked star map, coat unfastened, looking tired in a way she had never seen from him. For one brief moment, the narration could rest in his perspective. The awareness that every mating instinct in him felt dangerous after year 612, that if he pushed her now, he would repeat that old coercion and lose her in a different way. The fear that choosing wrong procedure could kill her. He spoke first. Celine was claimed by contract. I let counsel call it necessity. She died in the arrangement I protected. Kyle held his gaze. You marked me without asking. Yes. You blocked my transfer under a law that did not apply. Yes. You claimed me in council without quorum. His voice roughened. Yes. The honesty landed harder than any defense could have. He did not ask forgiveness. He asked for alignment. I will not deny what I did. I will defend why. I can accept censure. I will not let them use your name to preserve a system built to trade women as clauses. Kale's core hesitation had been whether choosing him meant erasing herself to survive his world. She resolved part of it in that room by stating terms no one of her rank had ever given a king. No private claims, no hidden marks. If you choose me, you choose in law where everyone can challenge and I can answer. He nodded once. Agreed. Second term, you do not protect me by deciding for me. Another pause. Longer. Agreed. That sentence cost him visible effort, and she noticed it, filed it, believed it only halfway. Half belief was more than she had before sunrise. Hearing day one opened where the story began, seals breaking, Maris exposed as forger. The chamber moved from suspicion to fracture in minutes. Maris tried to pivot, claimed she copied only what Regent advisors provided. Elowin entered with her arm in sling, alive, and submitted chain logs plus access petitions. Rurik's face did not change when his aides were named. His loyalty had always been to order over people, and he seemed to realize in real time that the order he protected had started eating its own servants. Days 2 through 5 focused on breach penalties and sabotage evidence. By code, 3 confirmed claiming law violations by a ruling king triggered censure and succession review automatically. Removal required clan vote. Delegates argued legitimacy, precedent, biological claim rights, and whether intent to protect mitigated procedural harm. While a parallel evidentiary motion proved the Stair assassination attempt was coordinated by Regent faction aides to keep the marriage alliance package alive and stop Elowin's seal testimony. Kale sat through every hour and took notes for her own testimony, because this time she would not let other people define her role in the story. She had been assigned silence in year 619. She now prepared speech like armor. Day 6 called Rurik. He denied authorizing violence and admitted pushing alliance reforms through coercive pairings. The frontier was bleeding, he said. Marriage contracts held lines when soldiers could not. His logic was not cartoon cruelty, and that made it worse. He treated women's bodies as tactical resources and called it stability. Dante listened without interruption until Rurik suggested Kale's case proved kings were vulnerable to biological whim. Dante answered with a sentence that changed the room. Law exists to restrain whim, including mine. By adjournment, the alliance motion was withdrawn. The named aides were stripped of command pending sentencing, and the Regent bloc lost the votes it had used to stall reform. Day 7 was Kale's testimony. Maris requested kin privilege to avoid direct perjury admission. Kale could have accepted and spared what remained of Stoneheart name. Her hesitation was old and intimate. Fear of confirming she had no safe family left if she spoke fully against her cousin. She resolved it by choosing civic truth over bloodline cover. Maris altered tribunal seals. She added impurity language to my year 619 right packet through elder access. I saw her correction marks on both records. Maris called her bitter, unstable, power-hungry. Kale did not defend her character in adjectives. She presented ledger trails, seal molds, and testimony from a wax smith paid through a Stoneheart Steward account. Then Elowin entered certified bloodline retest results, ordered during Week 10 pre-vote review, and matched against archival samples, proving the year 619 impurity line was fabricated and inserted after original sealing. The evidence did what outrage could not. By evening vote, Maris was found guilty of perjury and legal sabotage, stripped of rank, sentenced to exile beyond Crown districts. She left the chamber in traveling gray with no crest pin. Kale watched her go and felt grief arrive only after the door shut. Day 8 addressed kingship. Several delegates demanded immediate removal to preserve code purity. Others argued that forced removal under forged evidence would hand coup mechanics to future factions. Dante ended the deadlock by proposing his own limit, continuation under censure, pending open tribunal vote on code revision, full claim ratification frozen until revised law passed or failed. He was handing opponents a lawful route to block him, and he knew it. The move resolved a procedural obstacle no one had cracked: how to keep legitimacy intact while admitting the old framework had failed. That night, Kale found him in the training court after curfew, hands wrapped, hitting a wooden post until bark split. He stopped when he sensed her and unwrapped his knuckles without looking up. "If revision fails, I release all claims on you publicly," he said. "No retaliation." She stepped closer. "If revision fails, I still testify the code is broken." He lifted his eyes then, and she saw something he usually hid with discipline: relief that she was choosing principle, even when principle might separate them. That was the point where mutual trust stopped being theoretical. Day 9 closed with tribunal instruction for Week 10 open vote on revisions. Elowin and Kale drafted language overnight in the archive where the first lies had been written years earlier. They built clauses from hard lessons. Pre-claim scent acts require immediate provisional filing within 1 day. Private marks without filing carry penalties. Protection claims valid only with a 5-witness quorum unless emergency threat evidence is documented and reviewed within 3 days. Bonded rights cannot block transfer without the subject's consent statement. Biology remained recognized. Consent and review became inseparable from it. General Rurik met Dante at dawn outside tribunal gates. No escort, no ceremonial guard. Kyle watched from upper colonnade. Rurik offered no apology for strategy and no denial of damage. He resigned as war regent in plain terms, effective immediately after vote implementation, and requested reassignment away from court. Dante accepted. Their exchange lasted less than a minute and carried years of unspoken history. Some breaks in a kingdom did not heal in speeches; they were acknowledged in departures. Week 10 open vote filled the great chamber wall to wall. Delegates from all 7 clans took assigned rings, public galleries packed with petitioners, guards, scribes, widows from Week 1 who still had pasture rights because Kale had spoken. Elowin read each revision line in measured cadence. Objections came hard from alliance houses who had profited from coercive claims and from the remnants of the regent faction after their sabotage case collapsed. Support came from low-rank petitioners and several midline alphas tired of legal gray zones weaponized by regent politics. The vote passed by visible majority before noon. Once revision passed, claim ratification moved immediately under new code. 5 qualified witnesses took position in the inner ring, Elowin as recorder. 2 senior alphas, 1 healer, 1 neutral tribunal clerk. Dante stepped to Kyle and did not touch her until she nodded. He spoke in the short declarative cadence she had once feared, and now understood differently. Cale Stoneheart, I claim you in law and bond, by consent and before witnesses. She answered without tremor. Dante Ashford, I accept in law and bond, by consent and before witnesses. This public claiming reversed year 619 at the exact depth where the wound had been made. Witnessed rejection answered by witnessed recognition that no elder could erase. The formal bond rite followed at dusk in the winter court. No spectacle, just stone fire and the people whose testimony had carried them here. Taryn stood to Cale's left as sworn aide, still favoring his shoulder. Alawan stood to her right with legal register open. Dante's hand found hers only after the final clause cleared. The contact felt different from week 1 corridor marking. No hidden urgency, no unilateral decision, only mutual choice in full view. Kyle realized she was not bracing for withdrawal. That absence of fear felt almost unfamiliar. 3 days later, the Crown issued appointments under revised structure. Cale became Queen Consort and Keeper of Claims, a new office with authority to audit any claim petition involving coercion risk. The title mattered less to her than the jurisdiction attached to it. She could intervene where girls like her used to disappear into archive footnotes. Alawan remained High Scribe and expanded review staffing. Taryn entered formal service as Cale's sworn aide and courier chief, which he pretended to find exhausting while smiling through every complaint. Maris departed in exile before first thaw, escorted to the outer road without crest, sentence recorded as rank stripping after perjury. Cale watched from a high balcony and did not call down. Forgiveness was not required for closure. Truth had already done its work. Rurik left court 2 days later under resignation order, resolved off court as promised. His absence felt in military corridors where his voice once settled every dispute. The kingdom did not become gentle overnight. It became accountable in ways it had not been in year 623, week 1. Cale's first month as keeper tested the new code immediately. A border alpha attempted emergency protection claim without witnesses to block a widow's transfer appeal. Under old rules, the case could have lingered until damage became permanent. Under revised law, provisional filing required threat evidence within 3 days. None was produced. Claim voided. Transfer proceeded by the widow's own consent statement. Cale signed the ruling with steady hand and felt the past shift by 1 practical inch. Change in this world arrived as paperwork that kept people alive. At night, when court noise finally thinned, Cale and Dante learned each other outside crisis. He still spoke in concise lines when decisions mattered. He now asked before deciding on matters that touched her directly, and she noticed each effort because she knew what it cost him to unlearn command reflex and to live inside a mating bond he had once treated as fatal ground. She stopped interpreting his silences as rejection and started reading their shape, thinking silence that considered her, silence that asked patience, silence that meant he was afraid and trying anyway. Their intimacy grew from these small, accurate readings more than from ceremony. One winter evening, she found him in the nursery garden where Seleni's memorial stone stood under bare branches. He had never brought anyone there. She understood the invitation and its risk. He told her Seleni's laugh was loud enough to scandalize diplomats, and that he had mistaken compliance for safety until it killed her. Then admitted he spent years fearing that any mating bond he honored would become another political weapon aimed at the woman beside him. Cale listened without fixing, without absolution, and placed fresh cedar on the stone beside him. This was the point where 2 wounds recognized each other fully: her public abandonment, his coerced loss, neither canceled. Both carried differently now. Spring Court opened with its own theater, envoys testing whether the new claim code could be bent by status. Cale chaired the first review session as keeper while Dante observed from upper ring and did not intervene. A senior delegate tried to pressure her with Stoneheart lineage gossip resurrected from 619 records. Kale requested the certified bloodline retesting entered into tribunal record during Week 10 and upheld in final judgment. Impurity fabrication disproved in court by matched archival samples and live assay. She read the finding aloud and moved to sanctions for malicious repeat claims. The room took note. Her name no longer entered proceedings as weakness. When the session ended, Dante met her in the side hall where the first illegal mark had once burned on her wrist. He looked at that wrist now, then at her face. "May I?" he asked. She gave him her hand. He kissed the inside gently. No scent push, no claim signal. Just affection requested and granted. Minimal humor arrived from Taryn walking past at exactly that moment, carrying 3 ledgers and saying, "If you two are done rewriting culture in corridors, the noon docket still wants signatures." Kale laughed against Dante's shoulder while Dante almost smiled, which from him counted as spectacle. By midsummer, the revised code had processed 32 contested filings, 7 emergency reviews, and 4 sanctions for coerced documentation. Kale tracked every case because numbers made systems honest. She kept a small list in her desk of the women whose petitions had been dismissed under old rules and reopened under new. Some cases ended in reunions, some in legal separation, some in plain safe housing with no romantic framing at all. The point was choice. The point was, no one could call coercion tradition and hide behind ritual language anymore. Dante remained censure-marked for 1 year under tribunal terms, a visible reminder that intent did not erase procedural harm. He accepted it without complaint. During council debates, opponents still cited his 3 breaches whenever reform felt inconvenient. He answered by enforcing revised penalties against high-rank allies as strictly as against rivals. Legitimacy returned slowly, through repeated alignment between law and action. Kale watched him do the unglamorous work of earning trust and loved him more for that than for any courtroom declaration. On the anniversary of Week 10 vote, the Great Chamber hosted a public report from the Keeper of Claims office. Kale spoke from the central ring where she had once stood accused. She reported compliance rates, witness attendance, emergency review outcomes, and unresolved challenges, then called for additional clerk training in border courts. Her voice stayed steady even when she saw Stoneheart seats empty where family should have been. She did not need those seats filled to know where she belonged. Belonging had been rebuilt through choice, not inherited permission. Later that night, the 2 of them returned to the tribunal chamber after lights were lowered and galleries emptied. The stone table still held faint scratches from hearing week, including the mark where Dante had placed the iron torque before succession review. Kale ran her fingers over it and looked at him. "You almost lost everything." He answered in the same direct tone that first unnerved her and now anchored her. "I lost the version worth losing." She stepped into him and felt his arms close around her with no urgency to prove ownership. Only that deep, steadying instinct she had learned to trust because he had put it inside law as well as touch. Their life settled into a rhythm that looked ordinary from outside and felt hard-won from within. Council mornings, archive afternoons, training yard evenings, occasional fights where old habits flared and were named before they hardened. When conflict came, Kale no longer disappeared. She argued. He listened. When he defaulted to command, he corrected. When she defaulted to expecting abandonment, she said it aloud instead of punishing him for fears he could not read. Partnership in their world was not softness without structure. It was structure built to protect softness. No loose thread remained by first frost of the next year. Maris stayed in exile with rank stripped after perjury. Alawan continued as High Scribe, scar at her temple and sharper oversight than ever. Rurik served away from court after resignation, unresolved in affection, resolved in authority. Taryn held his post as sworn aide and still smuggled honey cakes into long meetings. The 7 clans operated under revised claiming law ratified in year 623 week 10, with 5 witness quorum enforced and consent filings mandatory. The kingdom had not become perfect. It had become harder to lie in. On the coldest night of early winter, Kale stood at the palace roofline where city fires stitched gold through snow haze, and Dante joined her with 2 cloaks over one arm. He draped one around her shoulders and remained close without crowding. She remembered the corridor in week 1, the illegal mark, the fear, the fury, the certainty she would be used and discarded by a system that always had. She looked at her wrist now, bare and warm beneath wool, and at the man who had broken his own claiming laws 3 times because the old laws could not hold what he recognized in her. He rewrote them, paid for it, and stayed. She turned into him and chose him again, with full knowledge of cost, in a life where her name would never be filed away unseen.